You are listening to the podcast That's Life in Sweden, or as we say in Swedish, Sånt är livet i Sverige, with me, your host, Lisa Åsimäki. I want to welcome Li Bennich Björkman, who is a professor at the Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Uppsala University here in Sweden. God morgon, and how are you this morning?
I'm fine this morning. The sun's shining outside, and it makes me feel alive.
We are moving towards summer. It's going to be 22 degrees here in Göteborg.
Really? Yeah?
Yes.
Well, that's so nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to today. So you completed your PhD in 1991. What was your doctoral study about?
The study was about cultural policies, you could say. I wrote a thesis about how writers of novels and such stuff, how they have tried to be, autonomous from the state in Sweden, at the same time as they are financially supported by the state, which is a combination not so easy to maneuver. So that was the topic. I mean, how has this kind of a bit awkward relationship been handled by their own organizations over the 20th century?
Okay.
And that is a topic which was very unusual at the time in political science, and it has not been very, very usual afterwards either. But now, when the discussions come up now about how free should the cultures be from politics, and the talk about armslängds avstånd, and which has been going on now, is exactly what this is about. Because in my study, I found that in the organizations that they created to give out sort of the state support, there were representatives of the government and of the writers, and the government their representatives never, ever took any part of the discussions about the content of what they supported. So that was how they sort of dealt with that.
We are going to talk about academic freedom later. And the thing is that you have had some significant achievement throughout your career. There's a couple of them that I want to take up. In 2007, you were appointed as the first woman professor at the Department of Government at Uppsala University. And in the following year, you became the first woman appointed a so-called Skyttean, professor of eloquence and government. Can you share the significance of both of these events and how these events have shaped your work as an academic and researcher?
Well, yes, that was a bit strange, I could say, because there were two professorships, at this department where I am still. And for some reason, I got both. So for some professorships. But yeah, I hadn't, I can say that I hadn't expected to get the first one, so that was really a huge surprise, and almost a sense of can this really be for real? As you often feel that there are so many others who are worthy of this. But then I decided to still apply for this even more prestigious chair, which is the Skytte chair here in Uppsala, which has been around since 1622. So we celebrated 400 years last year. Yeah, and when I did that, I thought more then, that, well, if I should get this, if this has a sort of very strong symbolic meaning and a signal to women, actually, that this can be done, and so therefore I also actively thought that I should not withdraw my application, because I felt a bit scared for all that, and can I take on this? But so that was my thoughts before that. But when I got it, it was also the first years overwhelming, I can say, because it is a very visible position. It comes with things that have to do with extra curricular things. I mean, not so giving out our Johan Skytte Prize every year, which is a worldwide prize in political science. Working with that is one thing which is very visible, and it's a lot of things. This professorship is considered to be a very important one. So I felt a bit, what do you say, intimidated, actually. Then I suddenly realized some years after that, or after maybe 10 years, 10 years, that I wasn't intimidated anymore. I had sort of got accustomed to what it meant. So I don't know how it definitely shaped me in various ways, including that we moved to the house, which goes with the chair in a sort of way. It's a apartment in central Uppsala where you are supposed to live if you get this chair. And the house was donated to Uppsala University by Johan Skytte in 1622 for the professor and the students then. But we still have it now as where the professor lives, but also where people work in this house. Researchers have their rooms. We have teaching in the house. We have a beautiful garden where a lot happens during the summer, and then the department has more modern buildings, of course, but it's still the heart of the department, and also of historic academic So it's a very particular place.
Yes. What made you interested in political science?
What made me interested in political science? I think it was that I thought it was exciting. Exciting because of its international connections or international focuses. At that time, when I was a very young student, and then I wrote my, my two bachelor and bachelor thesis and another thesis, and it went quite well. But I also felt it was such a thrill to write those. It was like the world opened for me, and I thought, wow, to be able to do this and to find out things about the world. But now I would say that political science for me has become much more broad than international questions. I mean, I'm very interested in history nowadays, and I think I must connect, historical knowledge and historical aspects to political science, which is still more contemporary temporarily oriented. But now I sort of come back also to the international questions, so it's been a circle.
It is. And the other one is there must have been some challenges. I mean, I'm thinking about going back to 2007 when you were first, when you applied for the position as a professor for Department of Government at Uppsala. Being the first woman, you would have been entering a male-dominated area of study.
Yes, that's really true, and that's also remind me of that. It's changing very much during these last 15 years or whatever it is. Yeah, because I wouldn't think of it as that anymore, but at that time, absolutely. I mean, and that goes for the entire discipline. I think both internationally and here in Sweden, that for a long time it was very male dominated, and yeah, I felt, as I said, a bit intimidated, and not only because of that, but I think it was part of it because because I felt different, and I also didn't really know how to. I didn't have so many to look upon, So how could I be? I mean, how should I be, or how could I be? And then I also, sensed, but never really openly confronted that various persons were discontented about the choice of me. Not necessarily because I was a woman. I don't think. I think some, it comes. But I think mainly because they had sort of expected someone else, and this was a bit of a shock maybe to some, that person or persons were not didn't go so far as they thought, and I sort of sensed that, and was a bit worried about it. So I tried to maybe handle that a bit subtly, although no one really told me that it is what we think, but you can always, sense that this is around. And so there were some things. I was very scared, for example, also to be the chair of our collegium for researchers and supervisors in the department, because these persons, much for better and sometimes for worse, so independent and so outspoken and argumentative and so on, and suddenly it was me who should sit there in front of 30, 40, 50 persons and try to organize this work, and I knew that some of them wanted to test me. So I thought that was hard. Yeah, I was saying that at that time when I applied, I had the feeling that I had enough competence or knew as much as the professors that I met, and that was a sort of comfort to me, or also sort of something to hold on to, because I felt then that why shouldn't I be able to be a professor? On the other hand, what I also thought at that time was, if I get this professorship, it will probably mean that I get less freedom, less time for research, more administration, more these types of tasks that come with some kind of responsibility, but also, and very sadly then, not to have so much time for concentrated research. And I was completely right in that, which is a bit paradoxical, I can feel in the Swedish system, at least, that professors are so, or have so little time to do what they are good at.
Exactly. Now, you have a special interest and curiosity about Russia and its history. Can you share what made you interested in Russia? And do you speak Russian?
First, I just wanted to say that I'm more, it's not Russia per se that I'm really interested in, but let's say the non-Russian parts of the former Soviet Union, that is, Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Armenia, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and so on. And through that, I've also got to know fairly a lot about Russia, because Russia is always part and parcel of that region. Or now, for worse, you could say, almost only, but it wasn't like that just 5-10 years ago. So that's my interest has actually come also from a personal for personal reasons, because my mother was from Estonia, and she came here during the Second World War, 1944, with a small fishing boat over the Baltic Sea, with many other refugees from Estonia. And so when I became an adult and it was possible to go there more frequently and easily, I started my research journey into Eastern Europe in Estonia, and from there sort of it has continued. But Russia, I mean, I feel that Russia, many who do research about Russia, Russia proper, so to speak, have often talked about that even those other states that I just mentioned are also part of Russia. I mean, they can call it Russia, you see. And that's, I think, also been dangerous, because that's exactly what Putin is saying and doing about Ukraine as a rationale for extincting it.
Yes.
Yeah. So Russia for me has not actually been my prior interest, and it still isn't really in that sense. I mean, I have gotten to know a lot about Russia, and I think I have a fair sense of how the political and, economical and also social issues work, as far as you can have that. But I also to really emphasize that I think it's hugely important that the research about other parts of this region is done, from their perspective, not, always you are have a relation to Russia. And no, I don't speak Russian, but I speak Estonian a bit. And during my research, I have had also very, very much assistance by local assistants, students, and others. If I have to translate or read books in local languages and so on, and that's invaluable. I mean, it wouldn't work otherwise. But I would like to learn Russian. I actually thought the other day, maybe I should start now.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? I mean, I just had so little time, and I think it takes, languages are hard to learn in my age, but but it could well be, but yeah.
You know, it's really interesting that you say, because I think a lot of people are quite not aware. I mean, we would, you know, I'm thinking about, especially outside the Nordic countries, we're thinking about Russia as these countries that you mentioned, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, that they actually speak Russian, but they don't. They have their own language.
Oh, yes, everyone. Oh, yes, of course. I mean, these are independent countries and states. All, and I mean, our neighbors, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, were already independent from 1918. Estonia, Latvia from 1918 to 1940, when they were again occupied by then Soviet Union and then Nazi Germany. But Lithuania has an enormous history of being one of the great powers of Europe in the Middle Ages, approximately from 14th, 15th century until the 17th, 18th, in union with Poland. So it was called the Lithuanian Polish Commonwealth and governed over huge territories. So Lithuania's sort of still very strong pride about their statehood and independence and all this comes from this history also, that so that's interesting that you say what you just asked or said, because then I feel it's even more important to try to emphasize this every time you open your mouth, that because it's a sort of, here you can really talk about the colonial gaze. If you can do it anywhere, you can do it when I think people sort of repeat what Putin wants to say and hear, that these are not states of their own. This is completely wrong, this is false, and this is dangerous, because in the end it will lead to violence. I mean, why has it happened that Putin's cronies have been able to control Russia? Well, I mean, if we start very briefly, I mean, in the 90s, it was a bit of a chaotic time in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that also meant that regional governors got a lot of powers. It wasn't really democratically driven reforms, but it was a bit of a decentralization, which Putin, when he was selected for power by other powerful people in Russia in 2000, started immediately to control and to push down, to centralize power again to Moscow. To take away the powers of the regional governors. So I mean, but also he very efficiently challenged the rising oligarchs in Russia, those with the super rich who had been able to use the transition for that to become enormously rich and could be competing with political power. So he put some of them in jail to signal to others, that this is what I can do. I not always do it, but I can do it. So he sort of silenced those, and some left Russia at those days in 2002, 2003, 2004, and so on. he challenged or struck against political opponents very systematically. I mean, again, either assassinate them, put them in jail, take all their assets away, or drive them into exile. And he also struck against the media in different ways. So basically no independent media, very few left when we come to 2007. So I think that was a systematic move in order to silence Russia, Russian civil society, Russian media, Russian oligarchs and so on. And then he started to move outwards, challenging then in his speech in 2007 the West, saying that, we have never got any guarantees for our security, which is a sort of aggressive signal something is going to come. And it came in the war in Georgia in 2008. And all these are signals, signals to internal audience in Russia to beware, to be scared, to know what he can do. He and his, of course, cronies, as you say. And also signals to the world and to the outside. I can do this. What can you do? And unfortunately, I think at that time, the hopes were still that, Russia was in a process of approachment rather than alienation from the international community, which was not the case. And then we are at 2014 and, the enormous Euromaidan in Kiev, not least, which I think maybe even could have scared Putin for real. And then, but then it becomes more important to have stronger means, so he takes Crimea back and starts a real war in the same year in Donbass in eastern Ukraine. And that was really, it was observed by some and several, I think, not as much as it should have been. And then it went on for so many years that people, I think, started to think about it as, as you do, as a normal. So I think it's really, if you look back on it, and it might be wrong, this is an interpretation I make, but, that he first takes on the internal challengers and challenges. When that's fairly done, it's time to move over to the bigger goal, to show oneself at the international arena and as a colonizing power to take back what he thinks is his or Russia's.
And what is so interesting is that, of all places, invade Ukraine. It is huge. It's a huge country.
It's a huge country, yes. But Russia and Ukraine go back a long time. The three Slavic states here with the Slavic population in this part of the world is Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Belarus, since 1991, is still as far as you can get to be a part of Russia, which is not what the population there wants anymore, but what Putin wants, and maybe Lukashenko as well. So that's the problem for Putin. For Ukraine, which has been in the Russian narrative considered to be very, 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 very close to Russia, their little brother and all that stuff, which is a narrative. This is a way to tell things so that it should seem to be natural that, why should Ukraine even want to be separate? We are a nice big brother. So you shouldn't buy that. I mean, that's not true. But Ukraine then was part of the first, when Soviet Union was established in 1922, Ukraine, as it then was, not Western Ukraine was not part then. It came in Second World War, but was part of that together with Belarus and Russia and Transcaucasia. And so Ukraine for Russia has a very specific meaning because it's an emotional meaning of closeness, of kinship, very strong cultural and historical components in this. It's also, I think, a story of power, so Ukraine could do some things, but not if Russia does not control it, really. So many persons that I've talked to have said, and some of them are Russians, that they think that, this has been Russia's ambition from the start of 91, that Ukraine should never become a separate state. And I think one part of this war against Ukraine is that after 2014, the leadership of Ukraine, not least those in foreign policy, sort of became traumatized, shocked over what happened. I mean, they had not expected this. They had to balance the relation between Russia and EU. But after that, things became much more coherent in the Ukrainian political thinking. The only alternative became the West and EU. That has also pushed Putin further. And since he cannot sort of get Ukraine legally, he wants to destroy it. He's mad at Ukraine. And so then it's these implications of, struggling towards the West and so on. But that might be, of course, is part of it, but I don't think it necessarily is the biggest part.
I listened to a fabulous talk you did for it's future studies, and you talked about that the Baltic countries like Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, but not Ukraine, have been members of NATO since 2004.
Yeah.
What was the reason why Ukraine did not join NATO at the time?
Ukraine hadn't applied for membership at that time. Ukraine had a much more bumpy road after 91 when you talk about politics, economics and so on than the three Baltic states. So it meant that Ukraine, I think, struggled internally a lot with also with the fact that you have an eastern Ukraine, which is it's not it doesn't want to belong to Russia, but it faces Russia. I mean, this is the eastern part is neighbor to Russia, and in those parts, I mean, there were much more and are much more, I think, thinking about how should we organize our relations to Russia in the best way, not to EU. And then we have the West, which is, neighboring Poland and others who think in a different way. This was very clear in those days. If we go back to 2004, it's less clear now, of course, after what's happened and the So Ukraine was never on the map for that. And Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, it's a long story how they managed to get the sort of electorate supporting these applications. But the one and only thing what they really wanted to secure when they became independent was a membership in NATO in order to protect them against Russia, because they knew what they could interpret Russia. They knew that, you know, this kind of honeymoon that was going on in the 1990s will not continue. That's just a phase because Russia is a bit weak. And they have been through the Second World War when the Soviet Union attacked them. The Western powers did not come to their rescue. And that lesson also made it very, very clear that if anything, it's NATO we have to be members of. I think, you know, in hindsight, and I always say, it was really the right decision. I'm not sure what would have happened now if they weren't NATO members.
Yeah. Yes. Do you believe peace is possible between Russia and Ukraine? If not, why not?
Peace in the sense that I mean, peace is always possible, I should say, but the question is rather to which price? At which price? Because this is not a war over something that you could say, you know, you have a dispute about part of this and that. Russia's aim is to basically destroy this country, and how can you negotiate about that even? So I think from that perspective, it's not possible to come to an agreement which a democratically elected politician like the president in Ukraine could come to his electors and voters and say, look what I did. In Russia, anything could be done, as you have seen. I mean, this is today what you can always say a sort of despotism. It's not even, you know, following much rules anymore of any kind. What I have thought about is if it could sort of, as in several cases in this region, we have so-called frozen conflicts where, you know, Russia and Moldova is, for example, have had a sort of war over Transnistria, and this is not solved, but it's not hot war. Nagorno-Karabakh between Armenia and Azerbaijan and Russia in the background is not solved. South Ossetia and so on in Georgia, not solved, but it's not hot war. Could it become such a solution? It's hard to say. I mean, it should mean that Ukraine give up in practice a lot of its own territories. And, maybe it depends also on how persistent is the Western powers going to be in their support to Ukraine.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, while Finland is today a member of NATO, from your perspective, what is the problem with Sweden not being able to join NATO?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about. It's given the situation that we have sort of showed clearly that we want to be members. It's of course not a nice situation. I mean, that we are so, locked out of it for the moment, or not being able to enter. I don't think it has any strong security threats that are obvious right now. I mean, we have Finland now, members sort of buffered also. Sweden is not the neighbor of Russia. It's Finland, basically. But if we think about it from a more broad perspective and think about what does it mean for the other countries in this region, for Finland, but also for the Baltic states, because I mean we have Gotland, which is in the Baltic Sea, and that's a really strategic place to launch things of various kinds or invade. Then I think it's a bigger problem for these countries who are really, really living with this threat every day, and people are scared. I mean, no doubt about that. Then Sweden's NATO membership will create a relief in that sense, that the Nordic countries, you could say, are in this part of the world, this region is NATO region, all in all. So, yeah, I think that's the perspective which is maybe the most important for the moment.
I'm curious about the incredible misinformation that is coming out from Russia, and I'm just wondering, can you talk about how we in the Nordic countries, I know there is a pact, the Nordic countries has this pact, Sweden, Finland, Norway and Denmark, how we work together, how to meet the blatant misinformation, whether it's through social media, however they're hacking through to our, government, organizations, and lies that are coming from Russia. Are we on top of things, do you think?
Oh my God! I if I had that information, or I would be happy or glad, but I don't. I mean, since this is much complicated, very complicated things, and I mean, how do we even know what disinformation and misinformation is seldom detected, because it is well done. If you ask me about, how are things being handled to try to get on top of this, I think if we look just at Sweden, which I know best, then I mean we have these agencies that have been much more alerted during the last couple of years, including the military ones, I think, to focus much more on the information question, if I put it like that. What they do, I mean, that's since I don't work there, I don't know what's going on. What I can see, if we look back a little in time, and I think that's maybe the only way for a person like me to say something about this, is that I could see early on after 2014, which is then this kind of, really important year here in this history of Russia, at least, that in many Swedish outlets, including in Aftonbladet, Kultur, these kind of things about saying, for example, that Ukraine is run by Nazis and Ukraine is not a real country, it cannot defend its borders, were being printed and said there fairly often.
And that is misinformation.
It's propaganda.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ukraine is not run by Nazis by any means. Ukraine today, for example, the president is Jewish. Ukraine has a small, right-wing party, much smaller than the Sweden Democrats, which have Nazi roots, as we all know. But no, I mean, this is misinformation, disinformation, but it suits certain circles, certain persons in the Nordic countries who want to, for some reason, support Russia in various ways. Why they want to do that is sometimes very hard to understand. I mean, some of them are former communists, but Russia is not a communist country. Russia is today a nationalist, hardcore nationalist country, suppressing minorities, suppressing women, suppressing sexual minorities, being extremely aggressive internationally. But, I think you can see this kind of disinformation and so on, misinformation. It must be connected to certain circles in the countries in which it is exposed in order to work. But when it comes up at Aftonbladet Kultur, it seems to be, wow, it's in one of the biggest tabloids in Sweden. This must be true. Yeah. So it's I think it's a lot going on. It's hard to detect it because it's well done, of course, and subtly done. And but I think one thing is good, and that's that there is a stronger alertness now that this is also a weapon of war. It's not only, for the chatting classes, but it's really a weapon of war in order to get support for your war.
In 2005, another incredible achievement you received. You were actually awarded the Swedish Association of University Teachers Prize for the promotion of academic freedom.
Yes.
So from your perspective, do you think has academic freedom changed today from what it was? And can you talk about the importance of academic freedom in today's world?
Yes, I can talk for hours about that, but I will not. I will talk very briefly. Yes, it has changed. It's always been one of my core concerns. For some reason, I just feel it enormously important. And I think I do that because everything, including scientific studies, shows how much this kind of freedom have made science progress in the way that it has during the last 150 years or so. If you ask me, and you asked me about has it changed since 2005, I would say definitely yes, and for the worse. Around the world, I mean, we have many threats because there are authoritarian or dictatorial regimes or half dictatorial regimes who have grown up and do not respect this kind of rights or fear, you could say this kind of freedom. But if we talk about what's happening more concretely in Sweden, it's a combination of that. In 2010, it was an institutional reform regarding the universities, and universities are where academic freedom should be executed. Yeah, there was a reform which called the autonomy reform, which should make sounded nice, but in reality it made all university leaderships able to abolish, for example, the influence of their scientific personnel for decision making and making it just advisory, or even abolishing that totally, making for more power for university rectors or vice rectors, or the sort of administrative personnel, if I put it like that, to have very strong opinions about, or even stop research that you cannot apply for money. So this reform has made huge impact on the Swedish university system, and mostly for the worse. It has affected academic freedom, I think, considerably. And I just talked the other day to a person who was very worried about that at his university. We have written books about that, me and some colleagues, and talked to people all over Sweden and who work in academia. And there are really people who are both scared, don't want to speak to us, or don't speak only anonymously because they are afraid of losing their jobs. But I think also one thing is worth mentioning about academic freedom, and that's that we have a system here in Sweden that, many people have to apply for money from research councils and all that to be able to do research. That might seem on the surface to be fine. I mean, why shouldn't you compete and so on? But the thing is that someone has to sit at the other end and say yes or no. And those are people who are your peers, your colleagues, but many of them are, of course, humans. They like certain topics, they don't like others. They think, it's a subjective decision. Of course, you can usually take out the worst and maybe even the tops, maybe. But there are many things in this process that makes for very strong subjectivity. That also has an impact on academic freedom, because if you instead had a higher position of research in your position when you are, for example, a professor or a lecturer, you could choose yourself, I want to work on this, and you don't ask anyone else. That's actually what academic freedom should be about when you have a permanent position. And that's not the case usually in Sweden. So there are many things that combined, I think, affect the freedom that is not there for its own sake, but for the sake of that we know from studies of brains and creative processes and so on, that freedom actually boosts creativity because it strengthens your inner motivation for what you do, which lets loose a lot of energies and mental capacities. And being told what to do has a detrimental effect. It's shown also empirically. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think will happen? Do you think it will get worse?
I think it has gotten worse. I think the last step, which I actually have been, as far as you could put it like that, shocked over actually, but it's the ethical, it's called in Swedish Etikprövningsmyndigheten, the agency for ethical improvement. Almost everyone now, and we take it to be more safe than sorry, send in what they want to do. A doctor, student, a researcher, and a professor send in it to this agency. Because they should say then, in our case, is this sensitive personal information that comes out of this? We have to approve it or not. But in reality, you send in a sort of research proposal where you argue for why is this relevant? Why should anyone care about this? And they sit and say, okay, well, this might not be so interesting, or why should you do this? And and it's being done in a way that is it's really absurd. I mean, if you want to research in political science, which is my discipline, speeches by, for example, Ulf Kristersson, open speeches, it has to be sent in so they can say, is this sensitive personal information or not? Yes, it is, because it concerns his political opinions.
Yes.
Yeah, but he's a politician, he's a party leader, it's open.
Yes.
Yeah. That doesn't matter.
Public property.
That doesn't matter. The
Really?
only thing that matters if you can do it on dead persons. Now there is a debate coming up slowly, or rising slowly, on this. Interpret the law in this agency and its adjacent structures. But I mean that it have been able to go so far as it's been, I think it reminds me of the Soviet Union, and I know the Soviet Union very well since I've done research on it for like 20 years. This is so close to the Soviet Union as can come. I mean, it's some authority, some agency. You should sit and say, I'm the agency for saying, I don't approve you to do this. And then you can go to court and you can go to jail if you break the law as a researcher or doctoral student.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Oh, well. Oh, that hurts. I didn't realize it was like that here in Sweden.
Yeah, it is like that. And that's why enormously not of these doctoral students in Sweden are in panic. They have changed their topics to, and the most absurd thing is that once you have started your research, you cannot reapply. So if you have if you during your research feel that I should probably ask something else here from my respondents or something, if you do that, either you have to send in a new application, and then it takes like 3 months to half a year to get some kind of. But then it's also said that if you have already done it, it's breaking the law. So.
Oh dear. So even an amendment in your thesis that you might want to ask a new question, you would have to seek approval.
Yes, and the thing is that you do not get approval of things you have already started. It must be done well in advance before you start it. So, if I think about it, I mean, for me and for many others, I guess, the research process is a process of, searching, and it's uncertain. You have to sort of let the empirics talk to you. I mean, if you thought one thing when you started, it's probably a sign of a good researcher that, maybe you end up in doing a kind of different study because the first one was not well enough designed, and you find that out. This is not possible anymore.
So what do you think is the purpose of universities then?
What is the
purpose of our universities if we don't have free academic freedom?
Well, I mean, I think we have academic freedom to a certain extent. I think some of us at least, try to defend it very openly and so on. But I do think that the universities have changed their sort of what they are for. They are becoming more and more entrepreneurial in a sense. I mean, if I look at researchers at my department, I often think of them as, driving their own small companies. They apply for money, they administer together with some help from our administration, of course. They administer those. They market it through different kind of tools. They also publish it, and they sort of that type of skills are very strongly emphasized in the universities today. I think it's a lot of talk about research and research excellence and all this, but at the same time, you could see that what seems to be, some evidence of less creative research, not only in Sweden, but in terms of pioneering work and so on, coming out of this. The more there is about research excellence, the more suspicious you should be, I think, because then it means usually that people do not have so much time for that, and so they have time for writing about that, but they have not time to do it. So what is the purpose of the universities? More and more also, of course, to be part of the educational society and focus on students, and that's not bad, but that's of course part of this. But a research university, as it's a specific type of university, there are also universities only, or colleges who only teach. But a research university, you have to also give enough preconditions for that this research can be made in a way that actually opens for new insights, for new knowledge, and so on. And that takes time, and that takes energy, and concentration, and so on. And I don't think that the universities are really so concerned about that anymore. No.
So what do you think will happen?
I hope, what I hope will happen is that we muddle through in the way that has been done in the last 30 years or so. There are threats to these kind of values, academic values, which are definitely there. I think also I haven't mentioned that, but I think the extreme growth of the bureaucracy around and in the universities is one threat, because it sort of is another kind of culture that invades the academic culture, and that is really also problematic, and I see it in a sense very often. But I think you can muddle through that, because you can also we can be active as academics or researchers, teachers, and so on, to talk about these academic values. Which are they? Embrace uncertainty when others want to embrace control and predictability.
Exactly.
And I don't think there will be like a big revolution and suddenly the universities are where I want them to be in another world. But I think understand how you can make the academic and administrative cultures coexist in a way where academic cultures is the strongest, since there are universities, but where we sort of can have a coexistence that does not threat the basic preconditions for free research. And to do that, I think we need more knowledge about places, universities or parts of universities, but where this have been done successfully. That we need some kind of role models here, because it's quick development, and we haven't mentioned it in those terms, but this is also a power struggle over whom should govern, whom should be in control, what kind of values should be at the top seat, you say that, sit in front.
Yes.
I mean, these are not innocent questions. These are really crucial. And so I think that kind of, we have to use knowledge in order to defend ourselves, because knowledge is what we work with. And we think we have, anyone who works in university as a researcher has a belief that knowledge in the best of worlds could change things for the better. Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to take up that you would like to add to what you have spoken about?
Oh, I think I could just add then what I talked about when we had the previous section when we talked about Russia and Ukraine, the Baltic states, and so on. One thing I think also we can help Ukraine now, but also in a little bit longer perspective, many of the other countries in this region which are going through a decolonizing process from Russia is to be more aware of that is what is going on here, and also to not let Russia succeed in making it as they want to do. They want to make it more difficult to cooperate with Ukraine and maybe over with Belarus, with Georgia and so on. They want their literature, their music, their art, their history to slowly be forgotten.
It won't happen.
And that should not happen. Here the West should be very, very, conscious about how much that matters to continue to work with people there or take on new collaborations and new partnerships, and also write about and talk about and go to see this kind of cultural aspects of these countries, because this is a way also to wage war against Russia. At least an important war, because I think really that this is part of Russia's strategy.
So much to think about, so much to talk about, and so little time. Thank you so much, Li, for sharing your thoughts with me this morning. And I hope I can invite you back at a later stage and for another conversation.
Yes, gladly. I mean, thank you so much for inviting me. And it's been a pleasure to talk and discuss with you.
Great. Thank you. And you have been listening to the podcast Sånt är livet i Sverige, or in English, That's Life here in Sweden, with me, Lisa Åsimäki. Till next time, take care of yourself and each other. Bye for now.